Well, my title is Anchored in God. So I was trying to think of boats and anchors, and I'd like to have my joke apply in some way. So I was remembering this old story about a couple of guys that wanted to go out fishing. They didn't have a boat of their own, so they rented a boat to go out fishing for the day. And they're sitting in their boat and fishing away, and they're just doing great. They're catching so many fish. So one guy says to the other guy, we gotta mark this spot, so we can come back tomorrow, get some more fish. So the other guy, he pulls out his knife and he scratches a big X in the bottom of the rowboat. And the other guy says, well, you fool, how do you know we're gonna get the same boat? Where they were thinking about anchors a lot, I was reminded of how important it is for us to be anchored, mentally, spiritually anchored, how important that is throughout our lives. I was particularly reminded of it this week. We visited some friends, a couple we've known for many years. We knew them at a former church. They visited here on occasion, although they live some distance away, but they're adjusting to assisted living center life now. It's a difficult transition. Many of you I know have had loved ones or friends you've guided through that experience. I visited right after one of our friends moved in, and then we've been back again, the two of us. But I was so struck by the first time I went, all the kind of belongings kind of, scattered here and there. It's nothing like home. Things kind of barely unpacked, nothing on the walls. It's go down to the dining room, and there's a lot of people looking, and even out front in wheelchairs or just sitting there in chairs with their walkers in front of them, looking a little lost, looking a little untethered. Do you know what I mean? All the familiar moorings, in their lives, not there. And at an advanced age, how challenging that is. What a challenging situation that is. To lose all your bearings and all your familiar routines and surroundings, and often dealing also with diminishing physical and mental capabilities. Deeply challenging. It just reminded me how critical it is, really, that we, during the course of our lives, at any stage or any time in our lives, that we learn to anchor ourselves in something unfailing, in something that's not going to go away when we have to move someplace, or we don't have as much money, or we lose a job, or a relationship falters, or all the many ways in which our bearings and our moorings can shift. We need something we're anchored to that's unfailing. Would you agree? We've got to have it in our lives, and we have a lifetime to practice it. We have every day to practice it if we're kind of aware of that need and conscious about it, and cultivating that awareness a little bit. An anchor is a nice image for that, and we know what it is physically. It's this heavy object, attached usually by cable to some kind of a boat or vessel to keep it secure, to keep it steady and stable. Spiritually, we need the same kind of anchoring, and what we want to be anchored in is God. Our awareness of God, our understanding that we are God-connected beings. That's our anchor. That's our anchor, and that's the truth we need to work with and affirm as long as we need to, until it becomes more and more a reality for us, a truth that we take for granted. Scripture is full of statements about how God can be this for us. God is an anchor. From Hebrews 6, God is a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul. From Psalm 31, God is my rock and my fortress. God is the rock of my strength. From Psalm 62. God is the rock, something we can be anchored to. Jesus said we should build our house on rock, so it will withstand any storms. We're emphasizing that point with a bell this morning. I like it. Build your house on rock. I don't think Jesus was talking about architecture. I think he was talking about inwardly, mentally, spiritually. We have to anchor ourselves to the rock of God in us and all around us. He set the standard, like some other spiritual way showers. He was able to know this truth of our deep God connection so fully, he was able to say, God and I are one. The Father and I are one. I think that's the high standard. And if we can get anywhere close to that, we'll be doing very good in life. We will know we are deeply connected. We are anchored in God. Paul, the Apostle Paul said, we are God's offspring. In him we live and move and have our being. We live and move and have our being within God. That's a good place to be anchored. If you're anchored like that, you can be anywhere. I mean, you can be in a nursing home, you can be on the street, or you can be in a new home, or you can be in a new relationship, or just lost a relationship. You can be in any situation in life and know you live and move and have your being in God. You're going to be all right. That's the kind of anchoring we need. Spiritually, how do we work on that then? How do we do it? And we talk about that almost every Sunday here in one way or another, how we anchor ourselves in God, what works for us, what kind of approaches can help us realize that truth more and more fully, that we're God-connecting beings, that we live and move and have our being within God. I think there's a lot of approaches and one goal. The one goal is always realizing our divine connection. And the approaches somewhat depend on who we are and what resonates with us best. And so I kind of came up with 3 ways. The first one has to do with images. Images. Some people I think are more visual than verbal. Some people more verbal than visual. And all these different ways can be very powerful to help us realize our divine connection, our oneness with God. And I was thinking about images in religious tradition. There's a rich and long history of icons and shrines and altars and images of the divine, of gods and goddesses. In Eastern traditions, in Buddhism, it's common for people to have an altar in their home with images on it of the Buddha or other religious figures. It's true. It's just as common in Hinduism to have gods and goddesses and have a shrine or an altar set up. I have a cousin in the East. My cousin Kathy had a guru for many years named Sri Chinmoy. I don't know whether any of you would remember that name. He's deceased now for some years, but he wrote a lot of books and he was very well known in the West. But she had an altar in her home that she prayed in front of daily with a picture of Guru on it that she would dwell upon a little bit before prayer or coming out of prayer. What was that all about? It's just like in Catholicism, statues of Mary or Jesus. What are those all about? When we gaze at them, what is that all about? The power of an image is profound. I think it reminds us these spiritual way showers have realized their divine connection so fully and kind of put that out there as an aspiration. We can become more God-realized. We can do that too, as you gaze at Guru's face or a statue of Mary or whatever it might be. And we can all do that with an image. Years ago, a wonderful unity minister named Reverend Robert Brummett, some of you might be familiar with some of Brummett's books. He did a workshop on healing and wholeness for us at Unity East. And one of the strong things he suggested at that workshop was that you come up, all the participants, he encouraged them to focus on a healing image, to come up with an image that was healing, about healing and wholeness for you. And when we asked why that was important, he said it anchored your practice. It anchors your practice if you have this image to focus on of healing, of wholeness. What would that be for you? Something tangible, something solid. I remember when my sister was she went through some significant surgery and was recovering from that. And in those weeks when she had no energy and could hardly move around at all, her daughter put out her sneakers right there on the kitchen counter. It's a tangible image. You're going to walk again. Here's your shoes. They're waiting for you. You're going to be putting them on and heading down the street. That's a nice, powerful image to focus on, and a nice kind of everyday one. I like that a lot. Something that anchors our healing work and our healing practice of realizing we're one with this power and presence, this healing energy, and it kind of affirms that. I think in psychology, sometimes they talk about that as having a safe place. You ever heard that phrase before? Have in your mind, if you're confused or in a difficult place, a place, a kind of a safe place that you can kind of hold in your mind. and be there in your backyard, on your front porch looking out at the woods, in your garden, on your bench, or in your morning chair where your spiritual literature is here, or where your candle is, or whatever it is, your safe place where you can kind of rest in that for a moment and realize you're God connected, there is a power and presence with you, you can relax a little bit, you can move into that consciousness more strongly. I think for me, those safe places, that healing and wholeness image would be primarily in nature. Maybe some of you are that way too. A natural place, somewhere. A tree can be a powerful healing image. A shoreline, a river, a creek, whatever it might be. Especially if it's a place, I think, that's very familiar to you, that you know well. For years and years for me, my grandfather's farm in upstate New York was a safe place for me to go in my mind, was a healing image, the pond there, because there are memories associated with it too that you've had in that place. Maybe there's a place like that for you that you can bring to mind to anchor your practice, your knowing of your oneness with God. Places where you have felt that sort of God communion, where you felt like there's a power with you, that there's an energy flowing within and around you, that can anchor us. I was reading a recent book by Parker Palmer. Some of you may have read some of his work. He's got a book out called On the Brink of Everything. That he's written in his early 80s here, I think, On the Brink of Everything. And it's reflections on aging and so on. But I noticed that in his book, what he focuses on is the boundary waters of Minnesota. I don't know whether, I've never been to that area, but they're on, I think it borders on Canada, and there's beautiful, like more than a million acres, and you can canoe, it's a wilderness area, you can canoe around it. And he's been going there for 20 years, a couple weeks to the latter part of the summer, and that anchors him in a sense of wholeness and healing energy flowing. Just to bring that back to mind, canoeing in the boundary waters of Minnesota. That sounds lovely, doesn't it? What would that image be for you? That healing image, that place you can go to in your mind, that image you can contemplate and feel steadied by, to anchor you. I think that's a useful thing to think about, to devise your own this week. Think about it. Where would you go? What image would you hold in mind to anchor yourself in God? A lot of us, like myself, more verbal than visual. Words are powerful. I think especially spoken aloud. They're very powerful to anchor us, and anchor us in truth. Powerful words of truth will anchor us in God. We believe in them strongly in Unity. We use them a lot. It founded that way, as most of you know, and I've shared Myrtle Fillmore's story many, many times. This was the foundation of Unity. She heard words that she was a child of God, so she couldn't inherit disease from God. How could a child of God inherit illness? And it countered everything she'd been taught growing up with TB. It refuted that, and she contemplated those words. They weren't anchoring for her. They anchored her in this higher truth about her and God and her connection with God. She said as she contemplated those words that these words held her mind above negation. Held her mind above negation. That sounds like a kind of anchoring to me. That's from her healing letters, if you ever want to read Myrtle's healing letters, where they're very personal, talking about how Unity started. And it started with that. These words of anchoring, these words of truth that anchored her in her awareness of God in her. Strong words of truth hold our minds above negation. They're anchoring. Our affirmations in Unity that we talk about a good deal, that we use a good deal, they have the same function, don't they? They anchor us in our God awareness. They hold our minds above negation because they remind us, I'm a God-connected being. God is a power and a presence in me that's unfailing, that's more powerful than I can fathom. I was delighted. I watched Zerelda Smith's video from last week, her guest speaking, and she gave you all a good one, gave us all a good one to work on in terms of realizing our God connection more fully. I dedicate my thought to union, That was the phrase she shared with you. To live in that state of awareness. I dedicate my thought to union. I am one with God. That's exactly what Jesus said, wasn't it? Father and I are one. I am one with God. I dedicate my thoughts to that. We use affirmations in unity a lot, and it's very often what we most need at the time is what we're going to affirm, because that's not what we're feeling very strongly at the moment. I always love that. Janet Bowser Manning, many of you would remember from Unity on Maze Road in Columbus. She wrote that beautiful chant, I am free, I am unlimited, there are no chains that bind me. When she was feeling very limited and burdened and not very free at all. And she wrote that chant as an affirmation. I am free, I am unlimited, there are no chains that bind me. I am free, I am unlimited, right now, right now. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful? She used that song to anchor herself in the higher truth she wanted to remember. And then other people have been using that for decades since then. And that's kind of a wonderful thing to keep in mind. A person can become an anchor, right? A person can become an anchor. Jesus became an anchor for all those who made contact with him because of his awareness of God connection. Father and I are one, and that emanated from him. People could feel that God connection when they encountered him. He became an anchor for others. And there are wonderful stories in the Gospels about how that played out and what that looked like. I've always loved the one about Jesus is with his disciples in the boat, and a storm comes up, and waves are coming in, and the disciples are frightened, and Jesus is asleep on a cushion in the front of the boat or something, and they wake him up, Master, don't you know we're about to perish? And he wakes and says, peace, be still. Who knows whether he's talking to the waves or the disciples? Relax, it's okay. But what comes through the story is that he had this awareness of, we're all right. We're all right. We're anchored in God. We're anchored in God. The waves can come and go, but we are anchored in God. It's all right. You can feel that from a person. You can feel that in our homes when there's a parent that knows that, or a grandparent. We're all right. Changes can come and go. Losses can occur. Things can shift, but we're okay. We're anchored in God. That's a great gift to be able to give another. So words can be powerful. Words can be powerful. Saying something aloud like, peace, be still, I'm anchored in God, can be a very powerful thing in a time of trouble, in a challenging time. I was remembering, and I've probably shared it before, this is the third one. It's visual, it's verbal, and it's also kind of tactile. John Bradshaw was a psychologist that was popular a number of years ago. I remember reading his stuff in my 20s, I think. But he taught something he called an anchoring technique. I guess it's common in psychology, that I've used for years when I wanted to remember something. That he would, like suppose you're driving and you can't write something down, or you don't want to get your phone out, that would be perilous. Or you're just about to go to sleep, and that's when I remember things, and I don't want to get out of bed and write something down, right? When something comes to mind and you want to remember it the next day, you anchor it. He would do thumb and forefinger and say it out loud. Call Joe, or email Larry, or call them, whatever it might be. Make a note of something. You anchor it like that, and by dawn, it works. You'll remember it in the morning if you anchor it. And I've always kind of used that, and if we combine that with an affirmation of higher truth, how powerful that can be. But I don't think this is a big enough gesture, do you? I don't. So here's mine. The power of God is in me. You want to do that? Let's join me. Let's join together in that. The power of God is in me. You bring it down like this is powerful. So that's more tactile and that's more powerful, I think. Whatever that affirmation is. I find myself doing this a lot anyway. I wonder what that's all about. It's a strong gesture of kind of grabbing onto something and pulling it in. And whatever that need is, that's what we want to affirm. What's lacking right now? Because that's the cutting edge for us in our growth work, in our healing work, is what we don't really feel right now. If we're not feeling very free, I am free and unlimited. There are no chains that bind me. If we're broke, it's like the abundance of God is flowing through me in my life. There is no lack in me, in my life, in the universe. Powerful healing energy is flowing through me if I'm not feeling good. Powerful healing energy that has sustained me my whole life. Whatever that truth is, we affirm it, we pull it in closely, and that gives us that deeper awareness we are anchored in God. That makes it possible to withstand all changes or challenges. That has seen us through a great many challenges and changes in the past and will continue to do so. Change is a constant. God is unfailing. See, God is unfailing. That's the only anchor, really, that is. The only anchor that is our divine connection, our God connection. And with that, we can handle the shifting changes, the times when we feel completely untethered and unmoored, like those people at the assisted living center I visited last week. And whenever times of fear or insecurity arise, we can drop anchor. We can drop anchor in God, which just means remember we're God connected, to strengthen and steady ourselves as we move forward. Robert Brummett, that wonderful minister who shared that healing and wholeness workshop, he shared a little story that I thought I'd just share in closing here. It's about going fishing on Lake Superior with some friends, and they were out on a boat. They probably rented that boat too. It was a good sized boat. And they were out on the water, and fog rolled in unexpectedly, and they could not see where they were going. And they kept going for a while, hoping to see some kind of land or something, some sites that would indicate where they were, but they began to get frightened, and so they dropped anchor. They dropped anchor right where they were, and they waited out the night. And they were there all night long, and it was cold, and Reverend Brummett said it was a very, very long night. And I bet they had a lot of fear about it, because isn't Lake Superior the Great Lake with the most crashes and so on? I mean, there are lots of boats under that water down there, because I think it might be the deepest or the most perilous waters, and there they were, stuck for the night. But morning light came, and they could see their bearings. The fog had lifted, and they looked, and they were about 50 yards from dock. They had gotten pretty close before, apparently, bumping into it, and they laughed. They were that close to harbor. They were that close to safety and didn't know it. I think that's a wonderful metaphor for us in times of trouble or confusion. It's good for us to drop anchor too, which means to remind ourselves, I'm anchored in God. Doesn't matter what kind of chaos or confusion right now. I'm anchored in God and the power and presence of God and the energy of God and the healing of God. I'm anchored in that, and I can rely on that, and we can remind ourselves of that. We can drop anchor in that way, and we'll find, like Reverend Brummett and his friends, that we're more secure than we thought, that we're closer to home than we thought, that we have what we need to move forward from here. So in times of trouble, drop anchor in God, and let God steady you. So here's our affirmation. We'll do it tactile also, if you wouldn't mind. I am anchored in God. Together? I am anchored in God. This is the truth we're affirming this morning, so let's close our eyes and affirm that deeply within. Each one of us is unfailingly anchored in Source, in God, in that power and presence that is with us always, always has been, always will be. We affirm that truth this morning, and we let it rest our minds and spirits. We draw peace and strength from it. And we know that power and presence will guide us through all the days ahead of us. Thank you, God, for your unfailing presence in our midst. Amen.